Thank you. Good afternoon. We all on this panel have the pleasure of speaking at the toughest time, right after lunch without a coffee, so I think they call it the graveyard shift. So we will try and, I'll try and be brief and hopefully stimulate some discussion. In this graveyard shift, I'm going to try and share some ideas, a basic idea about building a living economy. And as you said, Greece has been in the news the last few living economy in Greece, almost like a Herculean feat, task. But yes, the reality is that Greece is going through some extremely challenging times. The economic crisis has had a very big impact on signaling the need for change. And so we feel very strongly that now innovative ways of thinking so let's hope this works. Okay, this is continuously. And at any one point in time, the deficit is such dollars, and it's growing. Last 9 or 10 years. So the one very big trend we need to be aware of, and is the fact that the world is in right now. We're right at the thing is we do have these SDGs. We do have an agenda. Close to 2 years ago, most of the countries around the world agreed on this very ambitious agenda. 17 goals, something like 169, I think, targets. It's there. The Paris Agreement is there, despite the views of President Trump. That train has left the station. At the same time, we do know that one of the important limiting factors is going to be about funding. And we heard about this from one of the speakers from the Swiss Development Corporation, that we will require serious funds to really implement these sustainable development goals. It's not just about political willingness. It's not just about setting the systems in place. It's really providing the funding for these things to happen. So a world in financial debt, a world in need of sustainability, with a sustainability agenda carved out for it. If we look a bit more carefully at what debt actually means for the environment, this is an analysis that took place a few years back from our macroeconomics policy office, which looked at debt in a number of countries throughout the world and how that translates to impacts on the environment. And the very harsh reality is that debt in many cases is actually linked to an impact on the environment. Serious budget cuts, a reduced role of the state, authorities not able to actually do the jobs that they had done in the past, a real push for deregulation, an emphasis on rapid growth here and now to cut the deficit, to cover the debt. And at the end of the day, that really does result in a society that is in dire straits, an environment that is much worse off. So throughout the world, unfortunately, we do have examples where debt, and as it becomes deeper, actually impacts both the environment and the society in a big way. Now in Greece, we've actually witnessed that over the last 6 or 7 years. And that has brought us to start to think about what does this mean and what is the link between debt and the environment. And I just want to give you just a couple of examples. In the last 6 or 7 years, we have seen a real push towards deregulation. A perception, not that much from the public, but from the political forces, so to speak, that the environment at best in times of crisis is a luxury, or it might be an obstacle to much needed development, to much needed growth, or it might be a resource that needs to be sold off. So we have many, many examples of cases where changes have been brought to the parliaments, changes in legislation, to de-designate protected areas, to open up forests for development, to open up coastal areas, sometimes even pristine coastal areas. Fortunately, in some cases, we've been able to challenge those developments and really to hold the line successfully. But the trend has certainly been one towards deregulation. At the same time, massive budget cuts have meant that authorities, even wanting to do their job, can't do their job. Park rangers that no longer even have fuel to take their jeeps out to patrol protected areas. Coast guards that don't have fuel for their vessels so they can go out and monitor fishing activities. These are just some of the examples of a very real trend towards, as I said, an impact of the crisis on the environment. A second important thing I think that is important to keep in mind is that the discussion about debt is really there. It's still part of the Eurozone. There's an important meeting, I think, taking place in about 10 days' time, where again, that will be dominating the agenda. So the whole discussion around debt in Greece is not just dominating the media on this, it's actually dominating a lot of the political space, and that's not constructive, I think, for Europe overall. At the level of public sentiment, also in Greece, we find ourselves in a situation where, unfortunately, over the last few years, this is really leading to more of an anti-European feeling, and the rise, if you like, of far-right views in some cases, and a far-right neo-Nazi party that virtually did not exist in the past is now becoming increasingly popular. So these are the bad sides of that crisis. At the same time, as I said earlier on, we do really think that now is the time for a restart to that economy, a restart on much greener, with much greener characteristics. And I think the one thing that is very important for us to look at is the importance of nature and the environment for a country like Greece. The fact that in times of crisis, one needs to look to what are your strengths, one needs to look at what are your comparative advantages. And for a country like Greece, its comparative advantage is its natural resources, its natural beauty, its landscapes, its seascapes, its biodiversity, of course, its culture and its history. The fact that we have so much sunshine and so much wind, and that we could be investing in renewables rather than insisting on coal, which has been another trend that we've seen over the last few years. In the last 3 or 4 years, I think we've lost about 50,000 jobs that existed in the photovoltaic industry. So there's a very definite threat, a very definite trend there for the crisis impacting on the environment. There's a very clear opportunity, I think, for us to see things in a very different way and adopt a different paradigm. At the same time, I think it's important for us to think about the environment and what it actually means for citizens throughout Europe. This is some of the data from the Eurobarometer from 2011, 2014. We actually see that the environment to European citizens is actually very important or fairly important. Very few citizens out there say it's not important. So in these times of crisis, not only in Greece but throughout Europe, where we need a more unified Europe, maybe the environment, maybe sustainability can actually be a unifying cause. So the concept came up, less debt, more earth, debt relief for what we call a living planet or a living economy. And I just want to share a very short 30-second video with you where we're trying to get this message across in very simple messages, in very simple pictures in terms of what it means for our own country. Is it? Ah, there you go. It worked a while ago. Oh. So the proposal is a very simple one. One, the country requires meaningful debt relief on the basis of the fact that debt at its present level, 180% of GDP, is not sustainable. The last few years, it's just been all about austerity. And there's no way in this crippled economy and with such a large debt overhang that the economy can really restart in a very different way. So the first part of the proposal is we need to talk about meaningful debt relief. Now, what would that actually require? That would require at the same time an agreement, a basic agreement, that would be looking at 2 or 3 basic things. One, the nature conservation value of Greece, the fact that Greece is, in terms of biodiversity, one of the richest countries in Europe, and this is European heritage, it's not just Greek heritage. And so protecting that nature is part of, I think, of a European responsibility and a European contribution, conserving nature, restarting economy in a very different way, in building what we would like to call a living economy, and also looking at the horizontal reforms that are all about good governance, about transparency, about accountability, about legislation that is actually required in order for investors to have a level playing field and in order for investors to really be looking at sustainable investments. All of that is actually about implementing a lot of the important SDGs in a country within Europe that's crippled by its debt. That basic proposal we put together with the collaboration of the New Economics Foundation. And the idea was that the proposal would be there as an idea, as a discussion paper, as something that we would like to put into a formal or informal dialogue, if you like, at times, at a time where the debt discussion has opened up, and where we're trying to see how we can actually turn something positive out of this crisis. So we think it's a win-win for all situation. On the one hand, the creditors, they know that the present debt overhang is not payable as it stands. They will win green leadership in SDG implementation, and obviously there will be a lot of private sector implications, investments that can actually come for SDG implementation. Greece, from its side, actually wins some space to restart its economy along a different path, and it commits to saving, as I said, what is called natural heritage of Europe. A while before we developed this proposal, we actually thought, and this is more in line also with what the forum is all about, we actually thought 3-4 years ago that it's very important for a country like Greece to really have a very different paradigm, a development paradigm, a very different vision. And one that, as I said earlier on, stems from the fact that its comparative advantages, Greece's comparative advantages, are actually linked to the environment. And while we were hearing from everywhere in the country, yes, we need development, we need growth, nobody was actually trying to define what type of development we're talking about. And so in 2013, we undertook the initiative to elaborate a proposal for what we call a living economy vision for the country, which actually looks at each of the sectors like tourism or fisheries or agriculture or energy, and analyzes what it would actually take to transition from where we are now to what would be a sustainable economy. It also looks at the type of horizontal reforms that are needed in the country for that to happen, and closes with a chapter with very specific investment ideas that could be picked up either by the public sector or the private sector and could actually materialize the next day if the willingness and the funding was there. And that's just a sort of quick summary of what it looks like. It's looking at the differences at the public policy level, good governance, clear environmentally safe law, and then, as I said, in terms of innovation, sectoral green reform, and also what it would mean for society. So for those of you that might want to read the entire discussion paper and hear more about this, you can go onto this particular site and read more. We've created a site where we're inviting others to actually provide comments, provide feedback. We're very keen to hear from other organizations, from other institutions, what they actually think about this proposal. We've had quite a few meetings with national but primarily international organizations in presenting this proposal. And as I said in my introduction, I think that in these tough times of crisis, we need to look around, we need to start thinking differently, and we need to look at these crises as signals for change. And now is the time for that. Thank you.